Hello everyone, I am the Bandit Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from the Street Fighter II Secret Lair, Dhalsim, Pliable Pacifist. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. You could also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Dhalsim is a 1/3 human monk with reach for 2 generic, 1 green, and 1 white. He also has hexproof, but only when he's not attacking, which is fine because he's a pacifist. He's not going to be attacking anytime soon anyways. He also has 2 triggered abilities. One cares about a creature with reach you control that's attacking. When it does, it can't be blocked by creatures with greater power, and it untaps. While that's a cool ability, that's not going to be the one I'll be focusing on most. There are still a couple of cards peppered in for that. But what I most care about is his second triggered ability. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Dhalsim is no Edric, but you can at least draw up to 3 cards each combat step, which is something to scoff at. That being said, while we have a hexproof way of drawing cards readily available in the command zone, we're in green, so you know we can be drawing into way more cards. This is why the deck is also running Keeper of Fables, Oran Frostfang, and Toski Bearer of Secrets. For consistency as well as repetition, there are only 3 more humans in the deck apart from Dhalsim, so only 1/13 of the creatures are human, so it's safe to say that the Keeper of Fables will more than likely be drawing us cards. The Frostfang is amazing because it also gives our attackers Death Touch, which is super important. This will make opponents think twice about blocking any weenies they might be able to, since almost every block will be a trade. And it's also better than Dhalsim and the Keeper, since it triggers for each creature dealing combat damage to a player, and not just for each player getting the combat damage. Same with Toski. Toski is also amazing because it has Indestructible, so it'll survive almost as often as Dhalsim will, keeping that card advantage alive for as long as they can. Due to the way these triggers occur, True Conviction is also in the deck. Since all of our creatures will have Double Strike as well as Lifelink, which is an amazing bonus, we will draw twice as many cards when our creatures connect. This is no joke. Even with just Dhalsim, that's almost always 6 cards drawn per combat. That's practically a new hand. Imagine that with more than one of these effects previously mentioned. Besides these, since the deck is so creature heavy at 40% creatures, Beast Whisperer, Guardian Project, and Watley Radiant Champion are also included. Whenever we cast a creature spell, we'll also draw a card, thus replacing that card. The enchantment draws us the card when the non-token creature enters the battlefield, which is almost the same for all effects and purposes in this deck. Now, Watley doesn't do it right away. However, with her first loyalty ability, she will almost always get enough loyalty to ultimate during the next turn. That emblem is absolutely busted in a creature heavy deck like this one. The amount of cards drawn in this deck is so plentiful that we can even run Psychosis Crawler as one of the potential win cons. This thing does some serious work. Sure, it might seem slow, but it can also be quite the beater in a pinch since its power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in our hand. With how aggressive the deck is, this helps essentially magnify even further that damage our weenies are dishing out. Plus, the deck's running Thought Vessel, Decanter of Endless Water, and Reliquary Tower due to how many cards it's drawing. Imagine having said Psychosis Crawler in play while having 20 plus cards in hand, and then being able to swing in at some opponent that can't block it. In any case, these cards don't really take up slots in the deck because the first 2 are mana rocks and thus needed, and the third one's a land. However, sometimes it's good to discard down to maximum hand size. Take Riftstone Portal and Elixir of Immortality for example. While both non-bow, that's not the point. With the land in our graveyard, out of all lands will tap for the color mana the deck needs. So if you have to discard down to hand size, this is a great thing to get rid of. The Elixir will shuffle it back into our library, but the Elixir will also shuffle back everything lost to a board wipe or that was discarded away. It also sort of helps us from decking ourselves. If we're constantly shuffling our graveyard into our library, it deters it slightly. Alright, now that we saw how we'll be capitalizing on the Weenie Aggro strategy, let's see what creatures comprise that strategy. Scribe Sprites, Aven Skirmisher, Battlefield Raptor, Duskborn Sky Marcher, Healer's Hawk, Kitesail Scout, Lantern Kami, Rustwing Falcon, Segovian Angel, and Suntail Hawk are the 1-drop 1/1 flyers with the occasional 1/2 or the occasional additional keyword like First Strike, Vigilance, or Lifelink. There's really nothing special about these except hoping your opponents are light on flyers when you're playing this deck. That and they only cost 1 mana to cast. However, these aren't the only ones. Fairy Guide Mother, Hope of Gearport, Kitesail Cleric, Loyal Pegasus, Moth Rider Patrol, Ranger's Hawk, Sarah Ascendant, Topplegeist, Signal Pest, and Sephara Sky's Blade also only cost 1 mana to cast. Well, Sephara doesn't literally cost 1 mana, but if you tap down 4 flyers when you cast her, she'll only cost 1 white to cast, so she figuratively costs 1 white mana to cast. And she's super busted in this deck, giving indestructible to 45% of the creatures of the deck. That's no joke. Signal Pest also isn't a flyer, but it can only be blocked by creatures with flying or reach, plus it's always going to go on the offensive, so it might as well be in this category. In any case, it gives a solid pump and power for what it costs. Fairy Guide Mother can be sent on an adventure first in order to give +2/+1 and flying to a non-flyer for just 2 mana, which is great for cards like Toski, Psychosis Crawler, etc. Hope of Gearport is amazing at smacking that control player if you want to prevent anything bothersome until your next turn. Kitesail Cleric can be kicked in order to tap down any key blockers to ensure your fatties get through. Moth Rider Patrol can also be used to tap down potential blockers before swinging in with our creatures, which is great. Topplegeist does it when it enters the battlefield, but if we have Delirium, it can do so at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep. Loyal Pegasus doesn't have any special abilities, but it does have a downside in order to have a higher power. However, it's almost guaranteed to never be attacking alone here. Ranger's Hawk can be activated at sorcery speed for quite the investment in mana, all things considered. All for venturing into the dungeon. That being said, there are some short dungeons to venture through if you feel like any of those rooms could bring some advantage. Last but definitely not least is Sarah Ascendant, one of the absolute best 1-drops in the format. This will almost always be a 6/6 flyer with lifelink. This card absolutely slaps and your opponents are guaranteed to hate being on the receiving end of it. Dropping this turn 1 is always chef's kiss. And these 20 creatures aren't even all the deck's flyers. Another amazing flyer in the deck is Ancient Gold Dragon. Sure, it costs a whopping 7 mana to cast, but that's nothing to a deck with access to green. You then get a 7/10 flyer, which on its own is pretty good. However, whenever it deals combat damage, you roll a d20 and then create a number of 1/1 flyers equal to the result. So this flyer pops out even more weenie flyers to overtake the board. Absolute madness. We can also get flyers thanks to Spirit Bonds and Field of Souls. Whenever a non-token creature we control enters the battlefield, we pay 1 white and then create a 1/1 flying spirit. This is absolutely bonkers in this deck since almost all of the creatures cost just 1 mana to cast. So if we pay an additional white mana when playing them, we'll get a second 1/1 flyer. This card is too good here. If that weren't enough, we can also pay 2 and sacrifice a spirit in order to give a non-spirit creature indestructible until end of turn. So this can also help our best creatures survive combat, kill spells, or even board wipes. However, for that we have Field of Souls. With this on the battlefield, your opponents are going to be wary of casting their own board wipes until someone gets rid of it, because otherwise they'll just be replacing all of our destroyable creatures with more 1/1 flyers. We just recast Dhalsim afterwards and then swing in to keep digging through our deck. These unassuming enchantments do some serious work here. As for the other evasive weenies, the deck's running Jukai Messenger, Shanadid Dryads, Willow Dryad, and Zodiac Rabbit. The 1-drop 1/1s all have Forest Walk. With green being the most common color played in Commander, you almost always have someone to swing into with them. However, if your opponents don't have forest, we can just play our Yavimaya Cradle of Growth in order to guarantee that these 4 creatures are unblockable. That way we'll be drawing cards off of our combat-based card advantage effects without issue. Plus it also helps out all of our lands tapped for green too. Lastly, we got Augur Ilvek, Soltari Foot Soldier, Soltari Visionary, Soltari Trooper, Soltari Priest, and Soltari Monk. While these range from 1 to 3 CMC, they do have Shadow, which is essentially unblockable for all effects and purposes. So paying 1 extra for outright unblockability is okay for the deck, especially since there are only 4 of them. Soltari Visionary, the heaviest evasive creature to cast, is included because of its triggered ability. I absolutely love this card ever since cracking 1 back in the day. One of the deck's weaknesses are pillow forts, so what better way than to be able to get rid of them once per turn. Oh, and drawing cards on top of it too. In any case, the deck's running Aura Shards for good measure. With the amount of creatures the deck already has, plus the amount of tokens it can create, we'll have no problems dealing with pillow fort effects. Plus, it's also running Beast Within and Generous Gift for good measure. These catch-alls can get rid of anything at instant speed, while also giving opponents creatures that cannot block any of ours. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. The final card I want to discuss is Aluren. This enchantment is absolutely insane here and quite the bummer that it's on the reserved list. So if you don't have one, can't afford one, nor won't proxy it, don't worry, the deck will still work just fine without it. That being said, if you do have it, my goodness does this do some work. Imagine being able to drop all of your creatures at the beginning of the end step before your turn. This lets you keep creatures in hand in anticipation of a board wipe. or as impromptu chump blockers, or to vomit out your hand lest you discard them all to maximum hand size. This card has too many uses to name, and even if its effect is symmetrical, it's highly unlikely that your opponents are playing decks with as many weenies as this one, especially since it allows us to free cast 75% of our creatures. Returning to the main theme of evasive creatures, the deck's running Champion of Lamphold and Bower Passage. With the amount of creatures entering the battlefield, the champion is going to be receiving a ton of +1/+1 counters. Thus, it's going to be very probable that all of our creatures are going to be outright unblockable. As for the enchantment, if half of our creatures can only be blocked by flyers or creatures with reach, preventing flyers from blocking our creatures almost guarantees that the aerial offensive remains evasive. This enchantment does some work here. Spider Silk Armor, an auto-include in every Dhalsim deck, because it gives reach to all our creatures. Keep in mind that Dhalsim makes our creatures with reach unblockable by creatures with higher power. Since almost all of our creatures have such low power, very few creatures will be able to block them. On top of that, they're also untapped after attacking, so any survivors are at the ready for chump blocking next turn. Or, if they're still blocked, they're guaranteed to trade thanks to Bow of Nylea. This not only provides redundancy to Oran Frostfang's static ability, but it's also a type of Swiss Army knife. Out of these, being able to shock a flyer is great because it can help clear the skies of opposing weenies. We can also make creatures bigger, gain 3 life, or bottom deck 4 cards from our graveyard. This card is amazing here. Due to the nature of the deck, there are plenty of other cards with effects that can greatly benefit this strategy. For one thing, we can use God Eternal Oketra and Karametra God of Harvest to take advantage of all the creature spells we're casting. Zombie Oketra gives us a 4/4 whenever we cast a creature, so imagine getting 5 power or more on the board for just 1 mana. If that weren't enough, she's not that easy to get rid of since she gets Fate Sealed 3 cards deep into our library if she were to get destroyed or exiled. That's not a problem either since we're drawing into so many cards. If that weren't enough, she already has built-in Double Strike. Karametra is also hard to get rid of since she has built-in indestructibility. The amount of ramp we get from her is insane. Every time we cast a creature spell, we get to fetch for a forest or plains. With the way it's worded, they don't even have to be basic. The deck already has 4 dual-typed lands, so get those first. Thanks to all of the weenie spells in the deck, it's running 16 basics on top of that to really make the most of Karametra. This also helps thin the library of lands for when we're drawing off of our creatures. Same with Farseek, Nature's Lore, 3 Visits, Into the North, Rampant Growth, and Sylvan Scrying. We can't just rely on Karametra for mana acceleration. She's just one card in a 100 card deck after all. Sylvan Scrying doesn't ramp per se, but it does help us get either Yavimaya or Reliquary Tower into our hand, which is great. All that being said, the mana curve of this deck is so low that we don't really need much ramp apart from Karametra, these spells, and the previously mentioned 2 mana rocks. Well, the deck is also running Jeweled Lotus, but it's not entirely necessary if you don't have it, can't afford it, nor won't proxy it. You could even swap it out for Soul Ring if you wanted to. That being said, I'm not even running Soul Ring in this deck due to how few spells have generic costs. I'd rather run the Lotus because it has the potential of giving us a turn 1 Dhalsim, which will then allow us to start drawing cards from the get-go since almost all of the evasive creatures in the deck are 1-drops. Going back to making the most of our weenies, the deck is running Beastmaster Ascension, Halo Fountain, and Triumph of the Hordes as its other win cons. While death by 1,000 cuts is definitely possible, we need to get those numbers up. Psychosis Crawler can't be the only way to speed up our victory. Beastmaster Ascension is just brutal here since it's going to get online very quickly, and then your opponents are in a world of hurt. With Halo Fountain, we don't even need to connect. Once we have enough creatures on the board, we can simply activate it before our opponents can even declare blockers. Triumph of the Hordes, while a very salt-inducing card, is great in evasive weenie decks like this one. Games have to end after all. Heroic Intervention, Flawless Maneuver, and Teferi's Protection are included for good measure and should be in here anyways, given that the deck is so reliant on creatures. That being said, even if you don't have them at hand, the deck is very resilient against board wipes as seen through some of the previously mentioned cards and effects. So if you have to lose your board, that's fine, we'll probably rebuild it much faster than our opponents can. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 7 fetch lands, Temple Garden, Canopy Vista, Scattered Groves, Arctic Tree Line, Wooded Bastion, and Command Tower, as well as 8 of each snow-covered basic land. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Dhalsim Pliable Pacifist. This deck has the potential to draw into a ton of cards, filling your hand with responses as well as more creatures to put down. It's also resilient against its weaknesses unless you have a creature hate heavy meta. So if you want a non-blue deck that can outdraw most blue decks, give Dhalsim a go. However, if the immersion break is too much for you, we still have to wait for the Universes Within versions of the Street Fighter II cards to be printed. That being said, if you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Medic Kirby, and happy brewing.